One of our subscribers, Nathan, shared a real story from his life inside a hospital one night where a single overlooked detail nearly changed everything. What makes this story unsettling is not just what happened, but who noticed it. And when Dot, in the 4 hours since her arrival, she had become the subject of intense debate among every specialist. Mercy General could summon. Cardiology suspected an arrhythmia. Neurology wanted to rule out a stroke. Internal medicine argued for immediate sepsis protocols. Opinions piled on top of opinions, each confident, each incomplete. And somewhere in that tangle of expert voices, actual treatment stalled to a standstill. Emily stood at the far side of the room, watching the monitors instead of the people. Sarah's blood pressure was holding for now, but only just. Her oxygen saturation dipped into dangerous territory, then crept back up again, over and over. Like her body couldn't decide whether to keep fighting or finally let go. The rhythm of it unsettled Emily in a way she couldn't quite explain. It felt like an itch at the back of her mind, a quiet insistence that something essential was being overlooked. Dr. Richard Vance, the senior attending, ordered yet another round of blood tests. It was the third set in 2 hours. Emily noticed the wariness in his eyes, the accumulated weight of 3 decades of responsibility pressing down on him. Vance had always been cautious, painstakingly thorough, but tonight that caution had hardened into immobility. Every suggestion met with a request for more data. Every intervention postponed until another consult weighed in. The system was still operating, but progress had ground to a halt. In the maintenance corridor behind the ER, Nathan Brooks pushed his cart through the harsh fluorescent light, forcing himself to stay focused. There was a spill near Bay 3 called in 20 minutes ago. He was already behind. His shift had started at 11. It was now past 3 in the morning, that strange hour when hospitals felt hollow and haunted, filled with echoes of people who had once waited for answers that never came. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't need to check the screen. "Daddy?" Mia's voice was small and heavy with sleep, muffled like she was speaking through her favorite blanket. "Are you coming home soon?" Nathan leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. Mrs. Patterson from next door was watching Mia, like she always did during his night shifts. She didn't mind. But Mia had been waking up more often lately, reaching for a presence that kept slipping away. The guilt settled deep in his chest. "Soon, sweetheart," he said softly. "Go back to sleep, okay? We'll be there when you wake up. Promise, promise," she repeated. He ended the call and stayed there a moment longer, letting the corridor's silence wrap around him. Through the wall came the muted chaos of the OAL voices overlapping. Monitors beeping, rubber soles squeaking against linoleum. It was a sound he knew intimately, a sound from another life. Nathan had been an EMT once. A good one? The kind who could size up a scene in seconds, who made decisions under pressure while others hesitated. That was before the funeral. Before the small hand that reached for him in the dark now, asking for comfort he wasn't always sure how to give. He pushed himself off the wall and kept moving. The spill in Bay 3 wasn't going to clean itself. Staying busy had always been the only way to quiet the noise in his head. The spill was just a knocked-over cup of coffee, spreading across the floor in an uneven, dark stain. Nathan set his mop down and worked the liquid toward the drain, his movements automatic, his thoughts drifting. Around him, the ER pulsed with controlled disorder. Nurses passed without a glance. Doctors clustered near the central station, speaking in low, urgent tones. He was invisible here, just another cog in the hospital machine. Most days, that was fine. But tonight, something kept tugging his attention toward Bay 7. From where he stood, he could see the edge of the curtain, hear pieces of the discussion bleeding through the noise. A resident pushed for aggressive action. Another voice countered with concerns about liability. Medical jargon tangled with administrative caution until it all blurred together. One phrase cut through sharply. "We need to be certain before we act." Certain? Nathan almost laughed. Certainty had been a luxury in his EMT days. You worked with fragments? You made the best call you could. And sometimes, when all the data pointed one way but your instincts screamed another, you learned to trust the thing that couldn't be measured. He finished mopping and nudged his cart toward the supply closet. slowing as he reached the edge of Bay 7's curtain. Through a narrow gap, he caught sight of the patient. A young woman with dark hair lay pale against the pillow, her skin slick with sweat. The monitors beside her bed translated her struggle into numbers and waveforms. Numbers Nathan found himself interpreting without effort. Then he heard it. A nurse was briefing a newly arrived consultant, rattling off the patient's history with practiced efficiency. Collapse at home, confusion on arrival, intermittent chest pain, shortness of breath, and then, almost casually another detail, the patient had complained of a metallic taste in her mouth before losing consciousness. Nathan's grip tightened around the mop handle. Metallic taste. He knew that symptom. He had encountered it exactly twice in his career. Both times it had meant one thing, and both times it had required immediate, specific action. It was a small detail, easy to miss in the flood of information that accompanied critical cases. But it changed everything. Nathan stood still, suspended between the man he was and the man he used to be. The maintenance worker in him said to keep moving, to finish his shift and go home to his daughter. But the MTE part of him, buried beneath grief and routine, refused to let go. His phone buzzed again. "Daddy," Mia whispered, "had a bad dream." He pressed the phone to his ear, eyes still fixed on the gap in the curtain. "I'm here, sweetheart." It was a monster, she said. It was hiding in the closet. And it kept getting closer. "Monsters aren't real, Mia." "I know," she said softly. But it felt real. He heard the fear in her voice, the kind no logic could erase. She was 7. The world was still full of shadows that Maya-Tor might not hide something terrible. "Listen to me," he said gently. "Sometimes the scariest thing isn't the monster. It's not knowing what to do about it." She was quiet. "But you're brave, Mia," he continued. "You're the bravest person I know. And brave people don't let fear decide for them." He heard her sniff, then take a steady breath. "Okay, Daddy. Go back to sleep. I love you. Love you too." He ended the call, his own words echoing in his head. Brave people don't let fear make their decisions. The irony stung. For 2 years, he had done exactly that, choosing safety over risk, invisibility over action. He told himself it was for Mia, that stability mattered more than heroics. But standing here, listening to doctors debate while a patient slipped closer to the edge, he wondered if the real monster had been hiding in his own closet all along. Nathan rolled his cart aside and walked toward the nurse's station. Dr. Emily Carter stood there, scrolling through a tablet, her face carefully neutral. He approached slowly, fully aware of how this would look, of the boundary he was about to cross. "Dr. Carter." She looked up, surprise flickering across her face as she took in his badge. "Maintenance. Double quotes, yes." "The patient in Bay 7, Nathan said quietly. "The one everyone's been arguing about. Someone mentioned she had a metallic taste before she collapsed. Has anyone followed up on that?" Emily's expression shifted. Curiosity replaced surprise. "Why do you ask?" Nathan met her gaze. "Because I've seen that symptom before, twice. Both times, it was a sign of something specific, something that wouldn't show up on standard panels." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I used to be an EMT. I know I'm not part of the medical team here, but if no one else has considered it, maybe it's worth checking." For a long moment, Emily simply looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face for something he couldn't name. Then she glanced down at the tablet in her hands, the cascade of test results and specialist opinions that had accumulated over the past 4 hours. "What exactly do you think we're missing?" she asked. Before Nathan could answer, a voice cut through the conversation like a blade. "Dr. Carter?" It was Dr. Vance, the senior attending, his tone carrying the particular edge of Samayan, who had been interrupted mid-thought. "Is there a reason you're consulting with the janitorial staff about patient care?" Emily straightened, her professional mask sliding firmly back into place. "Mr. Brooks was just making an observation about the patient story. He has some medical background." Vance's gaze shifted to Nathan, praising him with the kind of dismissiveness that came naturally to men who had spent decades at the top of hierarchies. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Brooks, but I think we have the situation under control. If you could focus on your actual responsibilities, we'd all be grateful." Nathan felt the words like a physical weight, pressing him back toward the margins where he belonged. The old instincts were still there, the urge to defer to authority, to accept his place in the order of things. But so was the image of Mia reaching for him in the dark and the young woman in Bay-7 whose monitors were telling a story that no one seemed willing to read. "With respect, Dr. Vance," Nathan said, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. "Not sure you do." The metallic taste, she reported, combined. With her cardiac irregularities, it could indicate heavy metal toxicity, specifically thallium. It wouldn't show up on your standard talk screen, and if that's what's happening, she'll be dead by morning. The words hung in the air, sharp and unwelcome. Vance's expression hardened around them. The ER continued its endless choreography. But Nathan could feel the attention of nearby staff shifting toward the confrontation. "Mr. Brooks," Vance said slowly, "you're not a doctor. You're not even a nurse. You have no standing to make diagnosis, and frankly, your presence in this conversation is inappropriate. I suggest you return to your duties before I'm forced to escalate this to hospital administration." Nathan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't need to talk, no. It was Mia again, probably awake and wondering why he hadn't called back. The pull of it was almost physical, a rope tethering him to the life he had chosen. The safe and simple life where the hardest decisions involved bedtimes and breakfast menus. But the young woman in Bay-7 didn't have anyone to call. She was alone in that bed, surrounded by experts who were too afraid of being wrong to risk being right. "Dr. Vance," Nathan said quietly, "I understand why you're hesitant. Thallium poisoning is rare. It's not the obvious answer, but sometimes the obvious answers are wrong. And waiting for certainty means waiting until it's too late." He paused, feeling the weight of what he was about to say. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that someone outside your system might see something you can't. That's all." Vance opened his mouth to respond. But before he could speak, one of the monitors in Bay-7 emitted a sharp, insistent alarm. Everyone turned toward the sound, toward the curtain that separated Sarah Hollister from the rest of the world. Her vitals were dropping gain, and this time they weren't climbing back up. Emily Carter moved first. She crossed the distance to Bay-7 inches seconds, pulling back the curtain to reveal Sarah Hollister's deteriorating form. The young woman's skin had taken in a grayish pour, and her breathing had become shallow and labored. The cardiac monitor showed an erratic rhythm, spikes, and valleys that painted a picture of a heart struggling to maintain its essential function. "She's decompensing," Emily said, her voice carrying the particular calm that came from years off training. "Get me a crash cart and page the on-call cardiologist." The ER snapped into action around her. Nurses and residents converging on the bed with practice deficiency. But even as she worked to stabilize the patient, Emily's mind kept returning to what Nathan had said. Thallium poisoning? It was rare, almost exotic. The kind of diagnosis you read about in medical journals, but rarely encountered in practice. And yet the more she thought about it, the more sense it made. The metallic taste, the cardiac irregularities, the confusion and weakness that had defied every other explanation. Thallium was a heavy metal that accumulated slowly, poisoning the body's systems one by one until they began to fail in cascade. It wouldn't appear on standard toxicology panels because no one thought to look for it. And by the time the symptoms became unmistakable, it wasn't too late. Emily grabbed her tablet and began scrolling through Sarah's chart, searching for something, anything that might confirm or deny the hypothesis. Family history? Unremarkable. Recent travel? None. Occupational exposure. She worked at a small manufacturing company. Quality control. The details snagged in Emily's mind like a thread catching on raw wood. Manufacturing quality control. It wasn't proof, but it was a thread worth pulling. "Someone get me a Thallium panel," she said, not looking up from the tablet. And I need a detailed history on her workplace. Find out what chemicals she might have been exposed to. Dr. Vance appeared at her shoulder, its expression thunderous. "Dr. Carter, what exactly do you think you're doing? We have protocols for a reason. You can't just order obscurists based on the speculation of a janitor." "He's not a janitor," Emily said, still focused on the chart. "He's a former EMT, and right now, his speculation is the only thing that explains what's happening to this patient." That's not your call to make. Emily finally looked up, meeting Vance's gaze with a steadiness she didn't entirely feel. With all due respect, Dr. Vance, someone has to make a call. We've been running in circles for 4 hours while she gets worse. If there's even a chance that Mr. Brooks is right, we owe it to her to find out. Vince's jaw tightened. But before he could respond, one of the nurses interrupted. Dr. Carter. The patient's BP is dropping 80/50 and falling. Emily turned back to the bed, pushing the argument aside. There would be time for professional consequences later. Right now, there was only Sarah Hollister and the numbers that kept sliding in the wrong direction. Outside his curtain, Nathan stood with his back against the wall, his mop abandoned beside him. He could hear everything that was happening in Bay 7, could track the rising tension in the voices and think increasingly urgent rhythm of the monitors. Part of him wanted to leave, to retreat to the safety of Corridor Sand supply closets, where his opinion didn't matter and his presence went unnoticed. But a larger part, the part that had spent years running toward emergencies instead of away from them, kept him rooted in place. His phone buzzed again. He pulled it from his pocket and saw Mia's face on the screen, a photo he had taken last summer at the county fair. Her smile wide and gaptooth and utterly untroubled. He answered, without thinking, "Hey, sweetheart. Daddy, are you okay? Y'all sound weird." He almost laughed. 7 years old, and she could read his mood through a phone line. "I'm fine, Mia. Just busy. Is Mrs. Patterson with you?" "She's sleeping in the chair. She snores really loud. That's because she's tired, Bennis." There was a pause on the other end of the line. The particular quality of silence that meant Mia was thinking something through. "Daddy, are you helping someone?" The question caught him off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "'Cause you always sound like that when you're helping someone. Like you were worried, but also, I don't know, like you're doing something important." Nathan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle around him like a familiar coat. She remembered. Of course, she remembered. She had been 5 when he left the MT service, old now to absorb the shape of his days, even if she couldn't understand their content. She knew what it sounded like when her father was fighting to save a life. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm trying to help someone." "Good, that's what you're supposed to do." The simplicity of it nearly broke him. In Mia's world, the moral calculus was straightforward. You helped people because that was what you did. Because turning away was unthinkable. She hadn't yet learned about liability and protocols about the 1,000, small fears that accumulated over a lifetime until they formed walls too high to climb. "I love you, Mia. Love you too, Daddy. Don't forget to come home." He ended the call and stood there for a moment, letting her words echo in the hollow space behind his ribs. Then he pushed off the wall and walked back toward Bay 7. The results came back 23 minutes later. Thallium levels in Sarah Hollister's blood were nearly 4 times the acceptable limit. Somewhere in the quality control lab where she worked, someone had been slowly poisoning her. And the accumulated toxin had finally reached the point where her body could no longer compensate. Emily stared at numbers on her screen, feeling something shift inside her. A tectonic adjustment in the landscape of her assumptions. Nathan Brooks had been right. The maintenance technician with no standing and no credentials had seen something that 22 doctors had missed. "Start Keon therapy immediately," she said, her voice carrying across the bay. "Can get me the on-call toxicologist? We need to move fast." Dr. Vance had peered beside her again, but this time his expression was different. The anger replaced by something more complicated. "The thallium panel?" he said slowly. "You ordered it based on his suggestion. You ordered it because it was the right thing to do." Emily met his gaze steadily. And because sometimes Theon's work comes from the last place you expect around them, the ER continued its endless work. Lives saved and lost in the space between heartbeats. But in Bay 7, something was changing. The intervention Nathan had suggested was being implemented. It's a specificity attempt that might pull Sarah Hollister back from the edge. The question now was whether they had moved fast enough. Nathan stood at the edge of the ER, watching the controlled chaos unfold from a distance. He had done what he could. The rest was out of his hands in the domain of doctors and nurses. And the mysterious calculus of medicine that had once understood, but no longer claimed. His phone sat heavy in his pocket, silent now. Mia was probably asleep again, dreaming of monsters that weren't real and fathers who always came home. He wanted to be there with her, to sit beside her bed and watch her breathe. To pretend that the world was as simple and safe as her 7-year-old imagination believed. But he also wanted to see this through. Whatever happened to Sarah Hollister, he needed to know. Emily found him there an hour later, still waiting, still watching. The chelation therapy was underway, and Sarah's vitals had stabilized, though she remained unconscious. The road ahead will be long, involving extensive treatment and probably a criminal investigation into whoever had beneding thallium to her environment. But she was alive. Against all odds and expectations, she was still alive. "You were right," Emily said, stopping beside him. "I don't know how you knew, but you were right." Nathan shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I got lucky." The metallic taste triggered a memory. "That's all?" "That's not luck. That's experience." She studied him for a moment, her dark eyes curious. "You said you used to be an EMT. What happened?" The question hung between them, weighted with everything hadn't want to say. Nathan looked away toward the windows where the first gray light of dawn was beginning to seep through the rain. "Life happened," he said finally. "The kind that doesn't leave room for anything else," Emily added slowly, as if she understood more than his words had actually conveyed. "Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you were here tonight, and I'm sorry Abutho Dr. Vance treated you. That wasn't right. He was doing his job, protecting the system." Nathan's voice carried no bitterness, only the flat acceptance of someone who had learned to expect nothing different. "I'm not part of that system anymore. I made my choice. Did you?" Emily tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you never really left." Before Nathan could respond, her pager went off. Pulling her attention back to the endless demands of the ER, she gave him a brief nod and turned away, disappearing into the organized chaos that was her natural habitat. Nathan stood there for a moment longer, her words echoing in his mind. Then he picked up his mop and returned to work. The 6 minutes that followed the administration of chelation therapy were the longest of Nathan's life. He had trained to his duties, pushing his cart through the corridors with mechanical precision. But his attention remained fixed on Bay 7. Every alarm, every raised voice, every change in thimiant rhythm of the ER sent a spike of adrenaline through his system. He had done everything he could. The rest was beyond his control. But knowing that didn't make the waiting any easier. There had settled into an uneasy quiet, the kind that preceded either relief or duster. Staff moved between beds with subdued efficiency, their voices low, their movements careful. The rain continued to fall outside, steady percussion against the windows that seemed to mark the passage of time in a way that clocks could not. Nathan found himself near the supply closet again. It's close enough to Bay 7 to hear the monitors, but far enough to maintain the pretense of invisibility. His phone remained silent in his pocket. Mia was sleeping, Mrs. Patterson was snoring, and somewhere in the distance, a life hung in the balance. He thought about his wife, Claire. She had been a nurse at this very hospital back when Nathan was still running toward emergencies instead of away from them. They had met in on-air, not unlike this one, during a mass casualty event that had pushed everyone past their limits. She had been calm in the chaos, a steady presence amid the screaming and the blood. And he had fallen in love with her before the night was over. They had married quickly, too quickly according to some, but neither of them had seen the point in waiting. Life was short and uncertain, and they had both seen too many people run out of time to waste any of their own. Mia had come along 2 years later, a smile miracle with Claire's eyes and Nathan's stubborn streak. And for a while, everything had been exactly as it should. Then Claire had gotten sick. The kind of sick that didn't get better, fatally got worse until there was nothing left to lose. Nathan had taken care of her through every stage, balancing shifts at the EMT station with nights at her bedside, watching the woman he loved fade into someone he barely recognized. She had died on a Tuesday, he remembered thought, with painful clarity. Tuesdays had been their date nights back before Thionus, back when they still believed in futures. After the funeral, he had looked at Mia's small, bewildered face and made a decision. He would step back from the work that kept pulling him away. He would be present for his daughter in a way he hadn't been able to be present for his wife. He would choose safety over risk, stability over chaos, even if it meant becoming invisible. That had been 2 years ago, and until tonight, he had convinced himself it was the right choice. The monitors in Bay 7 chirped. A different sound this time, less urgent, almost hopeful. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. Around him, the ER seemed to hold its breath as well. Everyone listening? Everyone waiting. Then Emily's voice, clear and relieved. Vitals are stabilizing. He's responding to treatment. The words washed over Nathan like warm water, loosening something that had been clenched tight in his chest for hours. Sarah Hollister was going to live. The intervention had worked. His instinct, the one he had tried so hard to bury, had been right. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes, feeling the tension drain from his body. This was why he had become NAMT in the first place. Not for the adrenaline or the heroics, but for this, the moment when death stepped back and life pushed forward. The moment when everything you had done, every risk you had taken, proved itself worthwhile. His phone buzzed. Mia again. Daddy, her voice was groggy, still half asleep. I heard a noise. What kind of noise, sweetheart? I don't know. Like a happy noise. Does that make sense? Nathan smiled despite everything. Yeah, Mia, that makes sense. Are you coming home, Ano? He looked toward Bay 7, toward the curtain that hid Sarah Hollister from view. The crisis had passed. The doctors will take it from here, managing the treatment and the recovery and all the things that came after. Spart was down. Yeah, he said. I'm coming home. The dawn light was beginning to filter through the ER windows when Emily found Nathan again. He was gathering his supplies, preparing to clock out after a shift that had lasted far longer than scheduled. His movements were slow, weighted with exhaustion. But there was something different in his posture, a looseness that hadn't been there before. She's awake, Emily said, stopping a few feet away. Sarah, she's asking about Thepipol, who saved her. Nathan paused, his hand on the cart. That's good. Just hold. No? I told her about you, about how you caught what everyone else missed. Emily's voice was quiet, almost tentative. She wants to meet you when she's stronger. To say thank you, Nathan shook his head slowly. She doesn't need to thank me. Just pointed in a direction. You're the one's woe, did the actual work. That's not how she sees it. And honestly, it's not how I see it either. Emily moved closer, her expression serious. But you didn't, Nathan. It mattered. You could have stayed invisible. You could have kept your head down and let us figure it out on our own. But you didn't. You spoke up when it would have been easier to. Stay quiet. Almost didn't. The admission came out before he could stop it. Part of me wanted to walk away. The part that's been in charge for the past 2 years? What stopped you? Nathan thought about Mia's voice on the phone. About monsters in closets and brave people who didn't let fear make their decisions. My daughter, he said finally. She reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Emily nodded as if this made Looked you up. Your EMT record. You were good? Really good? 3 commendations for exceptional service. A reputation for staying calm under pressure. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. The system lost something when you left. The system didn't lose anything. I just stopped buying part of it. Nathan's voice carried no self-pity, only the flat acknowledgement of a choice made and lived with. Mia needed me more than the job did. It's not complicated. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Emily's gaze was steady, unwavering. There are ways to use what you know without sacrificing what you have. You've proved that tonight. Before Nathan could respond, a voice interrupted them. Dr. Carter, Mr. Brooks. It was the hospital administrator, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and an expression that suggested he had been awoken from a deep sleep to deal with exactly this kind of situation. I understand there was an incident tonight involving unauthorized medical advice. Emily stiffened. Mr. Brooks identified a critical detail that our team had overlooked. His input directly contributed to Savinga patient's life. That may be true, but it also represents a significant deviation from hospital protocol. The administrator's tone was measured neither hostile nor friendly. Brooks, I'll need you to come to my office for a formal interview. We need to understand exactly what happened and whether any policies were violated. Nathan felt the familiar weight settling back onto his shoulders. Of course, there would be consequences. Of course, the system would reassert itself, demanding explanations and justifications for actions taken in the heat of crisis. He had known this would happen from the moment he opened his meth. "I'll be there," he said quietly. "But first, I need to make a phone call. My daughter is waiting for me." The administrator hesitated, then nodded. "1 hour. My office?" As he walked away, Emily turned to Nathan with an expression that mixed frustration with something like admiration. "I'll go with you. Someone needs to explain the medical side of what happened." "You don't have to do that?" "No, I don't have to. I want to." She methicized directly. "What you did tonight took courage. The least I can do is stand next to you while they question it." Nathan studied her for a moment. This woman who had listened when others hadn't, who had acted when action carried risk. "Thank you," he said finally. "That means more than you know." He pulled out his phone and dialed home. Mia answered on the second. Ring? Her voice bright and fully awake now, filled with the boundless energy of a child who had survived another night of imaginary monsters. "Daddy, are you coming home?" "Mrs. Patterson is making pancakes." "I'm coming, sweetheart. But I'll have one more thing to do first. Might take a little while." "It's okay. I'll save you some pancakes." "You do that?" He smiled, feeling the warmth off her voice cutting through the exhaustion and the uncertainty. "I love you, Mia. Love you too, Daddy. Hurry home." The interview lasted longer than Nathan expected. The administrator, whose name was Mr. Whitfield, asked detailed questions about Nathan's actions throughout the night, documenting everything in precise bureaucratic language. Emily sat beside him, providing medical context and defending his intervention at every turn. By the time they emerged, the morning shift had already begun, and the ER was humming with a new set of emergencies. Dr. Vance was waiting in the hallway. His expression had shifted since the night before, the dismissiveness replaced by something more complex. Perhaps respect, perhaps discomfort at having been wrong. "Mr. Brooks," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong to dismiss your observation, and I was wrong about how I treated you. If you hadn't spoken up, Miss Hollister might not have survived the night." Nathan nodded slowly, accepting the words without celebration. "You were doing what you thought was right? Protecting the patient, protecting the team. I understand that. That doesn't excuse it." Vance extended his hand, a gesture that clearly cost him something. "Thank you for not giving up when I told you to." Nathan shook the offered hand, feeling a strange sense of closure. "It's what I was trained to do, even if I didn't do it anymore." Vance released his grip and walked away, leaving Nathan standing in the corridor with Emily. The morning light streamed through the windows now. It's bright and warming, chasing you with the shadows of the night. "So, what happens now?" Nathan asked, glancing toward the administrator's office. "Am I fired?" Emily shook her head. "No, Mr. Whitfield is recommending a commendation," he says. "Your actions exemplify the kind of interdisciplinary collaboration the hospital wants to encourage." She allowed herself a small smile. "I think mostly just relieved that we didn't lose a patient on his watch." Nathan absorbed this, feeling something he hadn't expected. Hope? It was a fragile thing, easily crushed, but it was there and honethless. "I should go home," he said. "My daughter is waiting, Nathan." Emily stopped him with a hand on his arm. "What I said before about there being ways to a SWAT, without sacrificing what you have, I meant it. We have an empty liaison position opening up next month. Training and consultation work, regular hours, no emergency calls." She paused, letting the implications settle. "It's not the same as what you used to do, but it might be a way back." Nathan looked at her for a long moment, weighing Theophor against the life he had built. Mia's face floated in his mind, gap-toothed and trusting. She needed him. She would always need him. But maybe needing him didn't mean losing him to a job that consumed everything. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "That's all I can promise." Emily nodded, accepting this. "Take your time. The position isn't going anywhere." Nathan walked out of Mercy General as the morning sun broke fully over the city. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, and the air smelled clean and new, washed off everything that had come before. His car was waiting in the parking lot, the same battered sedan that had carried him through countless shifts and emergencies. And he climbed inside with the particular exhaustion of someone who had been awake for far too long. The drive home took 20 minutes. He used that time to let his mind empty, to release the tension that had accumulated over the past 12 hours. The city scrolled past outside his window, a landscape of ordinary people doing ordinary things, unaware of the small dramas that played out every night in the rooms they passed. Mia was waiting on the porch when he pulled into the driveway. She launched herself at him the moment he opened the car door, her small arms strapping around his waist with a strength that always surprised him. "You came back?" she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I'll always come back." He knelt down to meet her eyes, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's what daddies do." "Did you help Thepperson, the one you were worried about?" Nathan thought about Sarah Hollister, awake now, and asking about the people Woe had saved her. He thought about Emily's offer, about the possibility of a future that included both presence and purpose. He thought about Claire and how proud she would be of the daughter she had left behind. "Yeah," he said softly. "I helped her." Mia's face broke into a smile, the same smile that reminded him every day why he had made the choices he made. "Good. Now come inside. Mrs. Patterson really did save you pancakes." Nathan laughed. The first genuine laugh had managed in what felt like days. He stood up, took his daughter's hand, and walked toward the house where his real life waited. Behind him, the sun continued to rise, painting the sky in shades of golden rose. Somewhere in the city, Sarah Hollister was beginning her recovery, and 22 doctors were learning a lesson they would never forget. And in a small house on an ordinary street, a father and daughter sat down to breakfast together. The monsters of the night finally vanished by morning. Nathan didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he would accept Emily's offer or if he would remain invisible, content with the safe and simple life he had chosen. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tonight he had remembered who he was, and some rememberings, once they happened, couldn't be undone. The pancakes were cold by the time they started eating, but neither of them cared. They talked about ordinary things, about school and weather and the neighbor's new puppy. And when Mia looked up at him with Claire's eyes and asked if he would be home for dinner, Nathan smiled and said yes. Not because it was the safe answer, but because it was true. Outside, the world kept spinning. Emergencies kept happening. People kept needing help. And Nathan Brooks, former EMT and current father, began to imagine a life where those truths didn't have Tobe in conflict. It would take time. It would take courage. But for the first time in 2 years, he believed it was possible. And that was enough for now.